Hey everyone, real quick, if you need a recap for Season 2 of You, just hit the link in the top right corner. Now, Season 3 picks up 7 months after Joe Goldberg and Love Quinn became parents. Hooray! Joe currently hates his life. He thinks Love is a complete psychopath, and the only reason he's really with her is because of the fact that she was pregnant. But they were told that they were pregnant with a baby girl. So you can imagine his surprise when a baby boy popped out. Henry 40 Quinn Goldberg, that Love tries to keep calling 40, and Joe has to keep reminding her his name is Henry. To make matters worse for Joe, his mother-in-law has gotten a condo 30 minutes away so she can pop in. But that ends up being kind of a blessing because parenthood hits Joe pretty hard. While they don't say it, it seems like the baby is suffering from colic. But what is known is Henry doesn't really take too fondly to Joe. Every time Joe picks him up or tries to pick him up, Henry starts crying. Dottie's shaman had told her that Henry was 40 reincarnated, so if that is truly the case, then the crying would make sense. But they're just new parents, sleep-deprived, irritable, love having it worse than Joe. And this new plastic suburban life that he's living in Madre Linda isn't really suiting him too well. They don't have a used bookstore, so he's forced to take his operation to the internet. All the profits he sends to Ellie whenever he hears from her. But the new life has them in the house a lot. They don't really get out much, and when they do, it's usually just to pick up a latte. One of the reasons why is because every time they do venture out, Henry ends up crying. One particular day, they're doing that very thing, trying to grab a latte. Henry starts crying. And a local mom who's an influencer, they call those momfluencers, named Sherry Conrad, walks over. She's got a very successful blog/podcast, and she has twins. And she seems about as fake as they come, but she's well aware of who Joe and Love and even Henry is. Madre Linda's kind of a small community, so word travels fast when new people move in. And she happens to be kind of the queen bee. She tells Love, we've got to grab coffee together. I can share all my secrets. But they don't really take it as a compliment. It sounds more condescending in a way. Love feels like she was just called a bad mother in public. On days like this, though, Joe has to remind himself of the mission in hand of being a good husband, being a good father, and that's tough to do with his smoking hot neighbor, Natalie, right next door. As they're walking in the house, they end up seeing Natalie grabbing the mail, but Joe takes a lot longer of a look than most would. And it's not like Natalie isn't staring back. As soon as they step in the house, Love starts kind of ripping Natalie for being cold, not giving her a housewarming gift or a baby gift when Henry was due, and Joe just agrees, yeah, she seems a little weird. Joe then goes to pick up Henry, but Henry starts crying. Love goes and picks him up and says, the babies can tell when your heart's not in it, Joe. And that's because Joe's heart isn't really in it. His heart is more next door. And when he sees Natalie leaving, he ends up creating an excuse to leave the house and follow her. And he follows her to the grocery store where, while she's inside, he's having a fantasy about her coming in the car and them getting it on. So it's pretty embarrassing when he gets a knock at the window as he's jerking off, and it's the neighbor. She tells him, you've got to be so underslept. I hear your baby crying all the time. It's kind of understandable why you'd be sleeping in your car in a grocery store parking lot, but I wanted to be a nice neighbor and save you a trip, so she throws him some diapers. But then she gives him a box of condoms, saying that the rumors about how women can't get pregnant while they're breastfeeding aren't true, so don't fall for it. And that gesture has Joe thinking that maybe she's flirting with him. As much as Joe wants to follow this, he knows he can't. He can't just walk out of Love's life because she has his child. He's also well aware he's kind of made some mistakes in his life, but that's not going to stop him from trying to figure out who exactly Natalie is. And just a quick deep dive in the internet, he finds out that she's a local realtor who's really good at her job. She left college early when she met her husband, who's a tech entrepreneur named Matthew. But he needs to know who she is in the real life. He gets that opportunity when Love goes to a spin class. So he grabs Henry, puts him in the car, and ends up following Natalie throughout the day. And that actually takes him to a local library where Natalie walks in, and now Joe is smitten hard. Joe ends up following her in there, trying to look inconspicuous. But he doesn't do a really good job. When Natalie heads to the counter to check out some books, he gets closer because he wants to see what books she's checking out. And a lot of the books she's checking out have been turned into movies. Who knew The Fast and the Furious was originally a book? But as he's trying to creep, Henry starts crying. It draws attention, and that's when Natalie turns around, sees Joe, and gives him a wave. He then walks up to the counter, and the librarian says, are you going to chase after her, or could I actually help you with something? And Joe gets an application for a library card. She tells Joe that they have a great kids section, but then also hands him a book and says, here, Natalie picked this out. And it's Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald. So now Joe definitely is convinced that she is flirting with him. I mean, after all, she knew the whole time that he was following her. Joe then heads home and starts reading the book. Love tried to head home after her spin class, but she ran into Sherry. Sherry introduces Love to her two friends, Kiki and Andrew, and they start talking about how hard it is to get the baby weight off, but then they invite Love out to grab a latte. And they start doing the whole rich people with problems thing, complaining about their nannies. Sherry starts talking about her blog, humble bragging a bit. Love tells her that she's never read it. Sherry then asks Love what she does for work, and Love tells her that she's trained as a chef, but after Henry was born, she hasn't really done that in a while. Andrew lets her know that her job right now is to connect with her baby and her man. They then start having that uncomfortable conversation about sex. You know, the conversation that you have with someone you've known for all of, 15 minutes. But Sherry's message is that if you're not having an orgasm, your breast milk probably isn't doing it for your baby's brain. So when Love gets home and puts Henry down, she starts trying to make the moves on Joe. Maybe get back in the saddle a little bit. Problem is, Joe is deep into that book, and he's more inclined to pick F. Scott Fitzgerald than the woman he thinks is a complete psycho. And at this point, Love can sense it. She asks Joe, why don't we ever talk? Why don't we ever talk? You always seem really distracted. What are you hiding from me? What aren't you telling me? Joe doesn't have a chance to actually answer the question because Henry starts crying, and Love pops up to go get him. Right before she goes up the stairs, she says, I'm going to take him to his grandmom's. Just enjoy the quiet. So now Joe is home all alone when he gets a phone call from a blocked number. And to his surprise, it's Natalie. Neighbor asks him over to have a drink. So Joe does that. The first question he has, though, is, how did you get my number? But she lets him know, my husband's in tech. Joe kind of thinks, though, it's more of like invasive tech. And Natalie tells him, well, there's no privacy in Madre Linda. I mean, even where we're sitting. She pulls out her phone and shows him that they're under surveillance via cameras. Actually, the place they're sitting is the only place where there's a blind spot. She tells Joe that's why I spend so much time by the pool. But then she shuts the cameras off. She does say, however, that now it'll alert Matthew, and he'll wonder why she shut those cameras off. So even when she's not under surveillance, she kind of is. She hates it. She doesn't remember putting a leash around her neck, but yet here she is. They then head inside to get more wine, but when they go to cheers, Natalie's glass ends up breaking and she ends up cutting her hand pretty good. She puts a rag around it, gets it patched up, and then they go to sit on the couch and drink wine. Natalie tells them that feeling that you have when you're with somebody and it's excitement and the possibility of a future, she wishes she could bottle it. She thought it would stay with Matthew, but it kind of just went away. They then get into talking about Joe's relationship with Love, and Joe sort of admits that he's only really with Love because she got pregnant. These are two adults that are admitting to each other that they would love to leave, but they can't for various reasons. Natalie then gets real kinky with Joe. She asks him, do you want to see my reading room? And at this point, Joe is just in love. He can't say yes fast enough. She takes him up to the reading room, which happens to be her bedroom. Her and her husband actually sleep in separate rooms because she has insomnia, and also she's kind of a slob. There's clothes strewn all over the floor, and Joe just happens to pick up her underwear. They then start hooking up, though. She ends up going to unbutton his pants, but then he remembers he's got Love, he's got Henry. He can't be doing this. So he pulls back. Even though he really wants to, he tells Natalie, I'm sorry, I'm just looking for a friend. And then he leaves and goes home. When Love comes home, he says, I just had a drink with a neighbor. You're right. She is weird. They then apologize to each other about yelling earlier. And that's when Joe gets that feeling back that he had for Love. The original feeling, the feeling that Natalie was talking about. And he throws her against the wall, and they end up having post-baby sex. A few days later, they have their first Welcome to the Neighborhood party. It's hosted by Sherry, and it's got pretty much the entire neighborhood there. Both Joe and Love are dreading it, but they already did their research. They hopped on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of that. So they're not going into this thing blind. They know about all of these people. As Joe starts walking around the room, he's pretty judgmental. He knows that Sherry had to apologize because she had a secret party a couple months ago after reportedly she got a secret vaccine. It was supposed to be for the Queen of England. Ended up being for Queen Sherry. Word got out. She had to apologize. These people are not Joe Goldberg's people, but he's willing to put on a strong face and just fake it till you make it. They go out to the lawn and they start doing reconnaissance, noticing the people that they saw on the internet. Love points out Kiki and her husband Brandon. Then she sees Andrew and his lawyer husband Jackson. But then Sherry comes over and takes Love away, showing her around the place. And Sherry's husband comes over and introduces himself to Joe. This guy is a 2021 douchebag, talking about diets and different kinds of diets and Joe's metabolism. I don't know. It's weird. He kind of is flirting with Joe, and Joe picks it up. But as Joe is talking to Carrie, Sherry has taken Love over, where her, Kiki, and Andrew are just standing there drinking wine when Natalie and Matthew walk through the door. They fill Love in on that marriage. They tell her that Matthew used to have a wife, Mimi, who everybody loved, but then this harlequin named Natalie came out of nowhere and stole him from her. He ended up dropping Mimi for Natalie, and they're pretty sure that Natalie cheats on him. They figure it's good to tell Love since she lives right next door to her. They're pretty judgmental of Natalie, but Love isn't willing to judge her just because of the hearsay. Later on in the party, though, as Love is grabbing some food, she overhears Sherry talking to a couple of the other girls. She did some digging and she found out all about Love, about her family. She calls 40 a crackhead and says that Love is living off Daddy's money, not working like the rest of them. Sherry's two-faced attitude really hits Love hard, but she wasn't the only person who overheard this. Natalie did as well. And Natalie takes her to the side and says, "Don't worry about them." She tells her that Sherry is a terrible person, but unfortunately she runs this town, so you can't get too righteous with it. The best course of action is to gain her respect, and you do that by being authentic. It'll scare her. Problem is, Love, after having the baby, doesn't really know who she is anymore. And Natalie asks her, if you could do anything, what would it be? And Love tells her that she would open up a bakery. And since Natalie is a real estate agent, she has the perfect location. She gives Love her card and says, "Call me." And then she comments on how she can't believe that her and Matthew haven't had Love and Joe over. And Love doesn't say anything, but she knows that's a lie because Joe told her that he went over and had a drink with her. So after the party, Love yells at Joe because she thinks she's cheating on her. She finds it really odd that after Joe came home from being at her place, that's when they finally had sex for the first time in months. And Joe admits that he did like that she flirted, but it's nothing more than a simple fantasy. They continue to fight a little bit, but the big question that Love has is, are you obsessed with her? And to that, Joe says no. A lot of this argument, though, stems from Love's insecurities about being a mother, and Joe has to reassure her, you're a great mom. But it's not just Love being insecure. Joe feels like he has no connection to Henry whatsoever. So the next day, he decides to take Henry out and bond with him, taking him to the library, reading him some stories, and it works. They have a little bit of a heart-to-heart, as much as you can with a baby, and it seems like they're on the same page. But as they were out, Love went down to the basement and started looking at her old cooking supplies, but she dropped something and saw that one of the air vents was ajar, and when she looked in it, she found a box, similar to the box she found that was filled with her possessions. But this time, it's not her possessions, it's Natalie's. It's the underwear, it's the bloody rag, it's another kind of bloody item. It's really gross stuff. But Love now knows that Joe is in fact obsessed. So she calls up Natalie and doesn't accuse her of anything, but asks to see the space for the bakery. Natalie shows it off to her. It's perfect. There's even equipment there. Natalie wants her to sign a 3-year lease on the spot. But that's when Love asks to see the basement. And when they walk into the walk-in freezer, Love attacks her with an axe. She then calls Joe, who is just leaving the library with Henry, and immediately Joe knows something is wrong. She tells him on the phone, I think we need to go to couples therapy, as Natalie is lying there in a pool of her own blood. In episode 2, Joe shows up and is shocked to find that Love has killed Natalie. He immediately starts saying he's innocent of anything, but Love says, Joe, you kept a box. I know what that means. So now they need to go into cleanup mode. As Joe is trying to figure out how to get rid of Natalie's body and what to do, Love lets him know that she did sign a 3-year lease on the place, so maybe they could just keep the body there. But that's not going to be an option. Natalie has a very traceable cell phone, so they're going to have to dispose of the body. Joe tells Love, we need her to disappear, never to be found again. There's a state forest about 10 miles away. We can dump the body there. And Love says, yeah, that worked so well with Candace. And Joe then starts questioning what exactly Love did with that body, or Delilah's. Love has never told him, but she just simply says, I told you I took care of it. Joe then starts going through the different ways he's disposed of bodies before, including the meat grinder, which Love takes offense to because she used it all the time. But the stress of the whole situation gets to Love. She ends up leaving and telling Joe, you can take care of Natalie. You care about her more than our son anyway. So now it's up to Joe. He starts trying to plant the seeds. He puts Natalie's body in a bag, wraps it up, and then texts Matthew, I'm going to check out a rental, which is near the woods. He then puts it in Natalie's cell phone's GPS, hops in her car, and drives to that location. He stops off in the woods, starts burying the body, but as he's doing so, he tells himself, this isn't me. I've changed. I was good for Love. Look what she's made me do. At that moment, it's a breaking point. When Joe gets home, he's planning on grabbing Henry and leaving Love, getting out of there forever. But he still has a job to do with trying to make it look like Natalie just ran off. After burying her body, he heads to that rental property, opening up her cell phone and texting her sister to make it look like she ran off. But as he's doing so, he sees the text message conversation between Natalie and her sister, and Natalie asks her sister, "Tell me I shouldn't have sex with the boring neighbor." And Joe's a little hurt by the fact that he was considered the boring neighbor. He starts wondering if maybe Love was right. Either way, he texts Natalie's sister from her phone, "Marriage is a trap, going to clear my head." He then leaves the car there and hitchhikes back home. As he was disposing of Natalie's body, though, Love was at home with Henry, stressing out. When Dottie shows up, she tells Dottie, "Great, can you watch him? I need to go stock the shop." And this is the first that Dottie is hearing about this bakery. Dottie would have preferred that Love had talked to her first because the Quinn family finances are in flux, and Love knew about that, but I guess she didn't truly believe it. She can't help with Elise. So now Love has the Natalie thing to deal with, but she's also stressed out about that as well. She does, however, actually have to stock those shelves, so she heads to the grocery store where, as she's loading her groceries into her car, she ends up getting hit on by this Stanford college guy. He persists, but Love lets him know, I'm married. Both Love and Joe reconvene back at the house, and they do sign up for couples therapy. They end up going, but Joe thinks it's a complete waste of time. He hates it. Mainly because they can't actually talk about the real issue. They have to dance around it using code words. Can't exactly come out to your therapist and say, "We're here because she ended up getting jealous and killing our neighbor." Joe does sort of come around a little bit once the therapist starts siding with him, surprisingly. But the therapist tells them that they need to come back ASAP. They need to figure out if they should be a couple. And then she gives them homework on how to communicate. Not react, but actually communicate. And they get their first test in that when they get home, and Love starts talking about what she's going to make for Andrew and Jackson's kid's birthday party. Joe is really surprised that they're still going to that, but Love says, "You think it's not going to look fishy if us and Natalie are the only people in the neighborhood not there?" Joe, however, doesn't want to pick a fight, so he says, "Sounds like what you need is some peace and quiet, so I'm going to grab Henry and head to the library." When Joe gets to the library, he asks the librarian to see the rare books section. And takes a little convincing, but she finally takes him down to the basement and shows him. And it turns out nobody actually works in there. The librarian does when it's slow. She works on her drawings because she's an illustrator. But Joe didn't go down there to check out a book. He went down there to find a book. He starts distracting the librarian with questions when he finally finds the book he's looking for. Really, anything that he can refurbish and sell for Ellie. He ends up grabbing the book, getting out of the library, heading home, refurbishing the book, posting it on the black market, i.e. eBay. The next day, they head to Andrew and Jackson's kid's birthday party, and it's just what you would expect from a rich people's kid's birthday party. I mean, they're handing out iPads, for Christ's sake. Both Love and Joe go their separate ways. Love ends up going to set up her cupcakes when she sees Sherry, and Sherry's pretty surprised to see her after the way that she left the party the other night. She kind of just flaked out. Love says, "Oh, yeah, my mom was watching our kids, and, she kind of has an expiration time." And Sherry starts asking if her mom is addicted to pills or alcohol because of the situation with 40. But Love brushes it off and says no. She then lets both Sherry, Andrew, and Kiki know that she's planning on opening up a bakery on Main Street. She was hoping that they would be her guinea pigs, but they are not interested at all. In fact, they get really quiet, and they start making excuses as to why they can't eat the cupcakes, even though Love has taken every precaution to make it gluten-free, keto, non-GMO, you name it. They don't want it. Love tells Sherry, they're lemon raspberry, because Love did her research. She knows that Sherry's wedding cake was lemon raspberry. But Sherry goes, "Yeah, I don't like lemons or raspberries, but, put them out," and then leaves. So Love's going to have to keep working on the relationship with Sherry. Joe, meanwhile, was out with the dads, his own personal hell. The most normal dad is this guy, Glenn, but Joe doesn't even like him. Glenn, however, reads at the local library. He's seen Joe. He suggests that maybe they carpool together, but Joe has no interest in that whatsoever. All of the dads then hear a scream, and it's Sherry. And you think it's a real emergency? It's not. Her kids got into the cupcakes. She starts grabbing the cupcakes out of their mouth, and Love says, "Oh, no, Sherry, they're sugar-free." And Sherry yells at her, "They have raspberries in them. Raspberries have sugar. We don't allow our children to have sugar." It's pretty awkward, and Love is pretty embarrassed about it. Carrie, though, pulls Joe aside and says, "Hey, man, don't worry about it. I'll calm her down." We have the twins reading Matthew's vital rings, and then he pulls out his phone and shows him the app, because he's showing him that the blood pressure hasn't spiked at all. They're completely fine. But this is the first that Joe is hearing about these vital rings from Matthew's tech company. And these rings that he finds out the entire neighborhood is wearing follow your heart rate, your blood sugar. And that's when it dawns on Joe, if the whole neighborhood's wearing it, then Natalie was definitely wearing it. Which means that Matthew can track where she is, but also heart rate. So as soon as Love and Joe get out of that party, they had to go dig up that body. They dig it up, they find the ring, but now they have to move the body somewhere else. The body can't be the same place where the ring died. They end up hiding it at the rental property, making it look like she took the ring off in the sink when she washed her hands. But now they need to get rid of the body. Joe drives to a construction site where they're going to lay foundation the next day. He figures this will be the perfect place to dump a body. But Love is a little concerned about the fact that Joe just knew about this place. Joe explains that it was a backup in case something went wrong, and Love starts insinuating that Joe has all of these places picked out on where to dump a body, i.e. he's got all these places figured out on where he's going to dump Love's body. Joe starts acting like she's nuts, but she brings up the fact that he had a hook to her throat, and everything changed when she said that she was pregnant. This spurns a pretty big fight, with Love pointing out that Joe is kind of hypocritical. When Joe does things, he's got reasoning for it, but when she does similar things, she's looked at as crazy. Love is well aware of the fact that Henry is the only reason why she's alive. She screams at him, "I can't trust you." He screams at her, "I can't trust you." He yells at her, "Because of you, I'm probably going to be burying bodies till I'm 70. If you get jealous, you're just going to kill somebody." And she points out, "Well, if I'm not enough for you, you're just going to kill me." They end up actually talking about this in their next therapy session. And this one goes way better than the first one. The first one, the big reveal was that Joe was planning on leaving. In this therapy session, the big breakthrough is when the therapist says that they are not killers, which is pretty ironic. Either way, they leave this therapy session feeling a lot better than the first one. It seems like they're both on the same page. They're in this for Henry, but the therapist does say, children can't be handcuffs. You guys have to be a team. Later that night, Love and Henry are playing outside when Joe sees it. That thing that made him fall in love with love. The thing that made him obsessed with love. The honesty, the beauty. At that moment, he wants to be forgiven for everything he's done to her. He gets down and tells her, "I'm not just all in with our son, I'm all in with you as well." All of a sudden, their relationship truly seems back on track. They start working on the bakery, but one of the big things they put in there is a box, just in case. In the meantime, they're going to use it as storage for flour and whatnot. But that doesn't mean that the trust issues are gone, because Joe hides a key and Love does the exact same thing. A few days later, they open up their new bakery, a fresh tart. As Love is waiting for her first customers, she sees Sherry and Andrew jog by, and she waves at them, but Sherry just gives her a pretty dirty look. But that's Love's job. Joe needs a job, so he heads to the library in the hopes that maybe refurbishing an old book can get him hired. The best the librarian gives him, though, is, "I'll consider it." That night, though, Love cannot shake what's going on in the house next door. She needs to figure out exactly what Matthew's thinking, so she decides, "I'll just bring over some cupcakes." But when she knocks on the door, she's surprised that frat boy from the parking lot answers. His name's Theo, and it turns out that he is Matthew's stepson. Matthew ends up showing up a little bit later and thanks Love for the cupcakes, but quickly shuts the door. And when Love gets home, that's when she sees why. Because the cops have shown up. And now, both Love and Joe are kind of nervous. In episode 3, the big story in Madre Linda is the disappearance of Natalie. Love is pretty stressed out about it, but Joe isn't. He's been here before. They did have to speak to authorities, but they played it off like they barely knew Natalie. They did admit, though, that she was the realtor that ended up showing Love the bakery. Love does, however, think that they might have gotten a gift. Matthew is being very suspicious. He's not talking to media, and quite frankly, he looks guilty. Joe's advice is, for the meantime, act normal, and that's what Love does. She heads to the fresh tart and opens it up. But as she's waiting for customers, Sherry and her little gang come as, quote, concerned citizens. She wants to know if Love has any information since Love lives right next door, and it becomes evident that Sherry is convinced that Matthew had something to do with this. Love kind of tells Sherry the same thing she told the authorities. Nothing was out of the ordinary, but she does tell her that Natalie had showed Love the bakery right before she went missing. And Sherry says, "Oh my God, that must be so difficult for you." And Love plays right into it, thanking Sherry for her concern and saying that the only thing that's getting her through this is coming to the bakery, baking, and then pulls out vanilla bean keto scones. And to Love's surprise, Sherry and her crew actually end up buying some. Joe is spending his time volunteering at the library since Marion, the librarian, didn't actually hire him. Marion introduces Joe to another librarian named Dante, who's a blind former member of the Navy, and the trio start talking about the missing white woman syndrome. It's the syndrome where the media only seems to pay attention when bad things happen to beautiful white women, ignoring other minorities, which is a big thing for Marion, who's black, and Dante, who's blind. Joe, however, fails this test miserably. Dante does mention that one of Natalie's friends is about to speak to the press, so Joe ends up excusing himself, going to the corner of the library and watching on his phone. And to his surprise, that close friend is Sherry, which Joe knows is bullshit because Sherry couldn't stand Natalie. But Sherry puts on that facade, demanding that Matthew come out and say something. But on live television, Sherry does say that Love was one of the last people with her. And Joe can't believe that Sherry just said that. As soon as the newscast goes off the air, Joe gets a phone call from the detectives. Although it doesn't actually have to do with anything from the news. It has to do with surveillance camera picking up Joe and Natalie in a parking lot of a grocery store. And it looks pretty bad because it's the visual of Natalie giving Joe condoms. Joe's trying to figure out a way out of this, and he decides, I'm just going to be honest. So he tells the detectives that because of having a new child and a mother-in-law pops in whenever, it's tough to really get some privacy. He makes them very uncomfortable by telling them that he was in that parking lot jerking off and Natalie has a sick sense of humor. That's it. The detectives seem to buy this, just asking him, could you please not do that anymore? And Joe seems to be, at least in the meantime, in the clear. While Joe's being interrogated, though, Love was trying to get a hold of him, and she's a little stressed out about the fact that he's not answering his phone. She gets a wanted distraction when Theo walks in. He tells Love that he was able to hop the fence and avoid the media, but because he left his house in a hurry, he forgot his wallet, and he's there, hat in hand, just looking for some free food. He is flirting pretty hard with Love, and she does ask him not to do that. He agrees, reiterating, I'm just here asking for food. So she gives him a cupcake. And when he accepts the carrot cake one, she starts reminiscing about making carrot cake for 40. She, however, gets a phone call from Dottie who tells her that Henry's in the hospital. So she frantically has to leave the bakery. And Theo actually offers to watch it while she's gone. Love ends up meeting Joe at the hospital, and it turns out Henry has the measles. They figure he must have gotten it from someone who is unvaccinated in the area. And for the first time in a long time, Joe Goldberg is legitimately scared. Love is now tasked with letting the neighborhood know that Henry has measles just in case somebody isn't vaccinated. She starts calling around, but word ends up getting to Sherry. Sherry tells Love, there's no reason to be embarrassed. And Love isn't embarrassed, she's just concerned. Sherry offers to let the neighborhood know, but Love says, no, I think it's important I do this myself. When she gets off the phone with Sherry, she sees Dottie on the phone. And Love wants to know why Dottie was on the phone, and Dottie lets her know that she just bought a vineyard. All that Quinn family money that was in flux, now it's invested in a vineyard. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity Dottie couldn't pass up. Love yells at her mom, I'm sitting here wondering why I want to be friends with Sherry when she keeps stabbing me in the back, and then I remembered it reminds me of my relationship with you. She then kicks Dottie out of the hospital, but she's got a bigger issue. The Sherry interview did spark some interest from the police. The media is camped out outside of a fresh tart, and Love is freaking out a little bit. She thinks that laying low and acting normal isn't really working. But Joe luckily has a backup plan. There was one thing that Joe kept from Natalie's box, and it was the bloody rag. So he tells Love, I'm just going to go home, grab it, and plant it in Matthew's yard. But when he goes home and he grabs the rag, all of a sudden, he realizes he's feeling really, really crappy. And that's when it dawns on him, he has the measles. He must have gotten it from Henry, because when he was a child in the orphanage, he told the doctor there that he was vaccinated, but he actually wasn't. Joe starts hallucinating and he realizes, I have to plant this pretty quickly before something goes wrong. So he hops Matthew's fence, but he ends up passing out in his yard. Matthew grabs him, brings him inside, and when Joe wakes up, the first question Matthew has is, what were you doing in my yard? And Joe says, I must have had a fever dream. Joe then apologizes for everything that Matthew's going through with Natalie, and Matthew says, Natalie said that you and her were getting pretty close. Did she mention going to her sisters or anything? And Joe says, no. Joe then checks his cell phone, and there's no update on Henry, which is cause for concern. The two start talking about fatherhood, and Matthew tells him that he had really no interest in being a father, but then he met Theo's mom, and he actually got excited about it. Although, he was a pretty shitty stepfather. But Theo's mom remarried, got a new family, and now he actually hates her even more, so Theo comes around by default. Matthew admits to Joe, most of the time, I have no idea what I'm doing. All I know is that he needs me, just like your son needs you. Matthew then asks Joe one more time, do you sure that Natalie didn't say anything about taking a trip? I mean, I'm sure she's fine. She's just doing this for attention, and it's spiraled out of control, and now she's embarrassed to come back. Joe can't answer the question, though, because he gets a text saying that Henry's fever is broke, and Joe is immediately relieved. Joe does end up giving Matthew some advice before he leaves. He tells him, you got to talk to the press, man. The optics are terrible. You need to tell your story before they do. All of Matthew's compassion, bringing him in, giving him Tylenol so the fever went down, giving him some fatherly advice, has made Joe completely reconsider framing him. On the way back to Joe's place, He ends up grabbing the bloody rag and bringing it inside. A couple hours later, Love comes back with Henry, and Love had no idea that Joe was actually feeling pretty crappy. After finding out how Joe's doing, she asks if he ended up framing Matthew, and Joe tells her, I couldn't bring myself to do it. And Love actually thinks that was the right call, saying, I mean, what kind of people would we even been? They then decide that night to burn Natalie's bloody rag. The next night, the neighborhood decides to have a vigil outside of Matthew's place for Natalie. In reality, it's just an opportunity for Sherry and her friends to do an Instagram photo shoot where they act like they're mourning. Joe and Love do show up, as does the local media. One person that is absent, though, is Matthew. He's yet to make a statement, and it looks like he's not going to. But as everybody's about to pack up and leave, Matthew does come out. He thanks everybody for showing up, saying that it would mean a lot to Natalie. But then he looks right in the camera and says, Natalie, if you're out there, come home. Or at the very least, just let me know that you're okay. But then he also turns into Liam Neeson from Taken, saying that if somebody had hurt her, he has a very particular set of skills. He will find them. He will kill them. This doesn't intimidate Joe at all, though. He's actually in pretty good spirits. He looks over at the detectives who have also arrived, and he figures they don't have anything. And if they do, we'll figure it out. The next day at the bakery, Love is at the counter when Gil walks in. Love asks Gil where his wife is, and he says, yeah, that's actually why I stopped by. She's up with the girls at her mom's place recovering. They had it. Well, it turns out Gil is an anti-vaxxer, and he starts trying to plead his case to Love about why he's an anti-vaxxer while also apologizing for what Henry went through. Love, however, doesn't say much. She just wraps up his baked goods and gives it to him. But right before he leaves the shop, she calls his name, and when he turns around, she whacks him in the head with a rolling pin. In episode 4, Love has dragged Gil into the cage, and she's left Joe to clean up the mess. Ideally, Joe would just like to treat this as water under the bridge. He starts trying to leverage Gil by saying, hey, you forget about what we did, and we'll forget about you endangering our son. But that sparks Gil in an anti-vax rant. Through some more conversation, Joe realizes that they've basically found the one person that might actually be willing to forget about this in Madre Linda. And Gil says, yeah, I'm willing to let bygones be bygones, but Joe doesn't believe him. Joe thinks the best way to handle the Gil situation is finding some dirt on Gil so that he keeps their secret, they keep his. Figures he'll do that while working at the library. But before he can even start, Gil comes up spontaneously by Dante because Gil was supposed to read to the kids, but he didn't show up. And that draws a pretty big red flag. Joe then gets a phone call at work from Love, who's very concerned because the community is going to go out and search for Natalie in the woods. The police found the ring in the rental property, and this move actually makes a ton of sense, but she's concerned. Joe says just continue to act normal, and honestly, you should probably volunteer. It won't look suspicious if you do that. After getting off the phone with Love, Joe finally gets into digging on who Gil is, and it's not great because Gil is the modern-day version of Ned Flanders. The only red flag is that he had a job at a college that he left abruptly, and around the same time, a female student was attacked, but the description doesn't fit Gil at all. He also needs to cover his tracks on why Gil didn't show up for the reading. So he starts writing an email to the library apologizing from Gil and saying that something came up. And that's when he gets caught by Marion, the librarian. She wants to know if he took one of these rare books that's missing, and he did. He took it to sell for Ellie, but he plays it off like he took it just to read it. And she gets really annoyed. She says, Joe, for those of us who didn't grow up with first editions as coasters, and Joe immediately cuts her off and sets the record straight that he didn't grow up rich and privileged. He grew up an orphan that was taken in by a guy who ran a used bookstore. That's it. Joe's background actually helps Marion see him in a whole new light. But back over with Love, she was so stressed out that she closed the bakery early, and when she headed home, she could hear Theo arguing with Matthew. Theo doesn't want to go on the search for Natalie at all. He doesn't want to join the Instagram squad that's going to go out and try to get likes. But the main thing that really upsets him is the fact that they're convinced that Matthew did it, so he doesn't want to go out and help sharpen the pitchforks for the townspeople. Love, however, is able to convince him to go, saying that if he doesn't go, the optics are going to be terrible, and she volunteers to be his search partner. Later that night, Joe and Love are discussing the whole Gil situation, and Joe lets her know that he couldn't find a good secret on Gil. He even went to Gil and asked, but the secret that Gil gave him was terrible. Love then brings up that maybe the only option they have is just to get rid of Gil. This sparks a pretty big argument between the two, and it crescendos with Joe yelling at her, "I'm not going to kill anyone else for you." They both end up turning in for the night, but they both still have this Gil situation to deal with. And the next morning, when Love's mom comes over to watch Henry, she asks her, "Hey, does Dad still have that private investigator?" And Dottie says, "Yeah, he does. Why? And Love has to think on her feet, and she tells Dottie that she finds the guy that she's renting the bakery from a little sketchy, and she just wants to look into him. In reality, she wants to look into Gil. And it doesn't take long for the private investigator to contact her back, and he's found something. It's a cheating scandal. So armed with evidence, Love and Joe head to the cage. Gil's oldest son, Alan, goes to Dartmouth, but he didn't get in the most normal ways. First of all, he had a perfect SAT score, which is possible, but pretty unlikely. There's also his transcript. It says he had an All-American water polo career that was derailed with an injury. And Gil says, that's not my son. And Love says, well, it's in his transcript. Here's something else that's in his transcript. A $50,000 donation to a fund to help underprivileged kids go to college. The thing about that is, there is no fund. Most of the money went to some girl that Alan graduated with. She's a former cheerleader. Love figures that this was a pact between the families, but by Gil's reaction, Joe can tell he had no idea about this. This was all Gil's wife's doing. And Gil slumps down and says, oh God, Alan, you did it again? And that's when it dawns on Joe that Gil didn't attack that girl at the college. It must have been Alan. And they had to pay off the cheerleader because Alan must have did something to her as well. Gil really believed that Alan was never going to do this again. It was a one-time thing, and he's pretty upset about it. So Joe and Love end up leaving him in the cage for the night to just kind of be with his thoughts, which is a bad move. Because the next day, when Joe goes to check up on Gil, he hung himself in the middle of the night. Both Joe and Love are trying to figure out what exactly they're going to do. While they're trying to do that, Love gets a text message from Theo saying, hey, I'm heading out to the park. I'll meet you there. Because that's the day of the search. So Love gets up to leave, but then it hits her like a eureka moment. They have a body that they don't want anyone to find, and they have a dead body of a guy who they were trying to keep quiet. So Love tells Joe, take Gil's body back to his house. His wife and children aren't there anyway. Set it up like he killed himself in the house, and write a suicide letter that says that he was the one who killed Natalie. We'll put fingerprints on the murder weapon. I'll take it out to the woods and I'll stash it there. Police will find it. They'll never suspect us. So both Love and Joe go their separate ways and start going through the plan. Joe does exactly as Love told him to, setting up the body, making it look super legit, and Love heads out to the woods where Sherry has gotten everybody together and makes a plea to bring Natalie home, using a hashtag, of course. It's pretty vomit-inducing. But when Love goes to grab the items that they'll need for the search, she runs into Matthew. Matthew ends up thanking Love for being able to convince Theo to come on out. He says, Theo says you're a really good person. He then excuses himself, and they start the search. And the whole time, Theo is complaining to Love about how fake Sherry is. But Love is just trying to find a spot where she can hide the murder weapon. So she uses the excuse that she has to use the bathroom and sneaks off to hide it. But when she comes back to find Theo, she finds Theo screaming at Sherry. Because Theo overheard Sherry saying that if she was married to Matthew, she would disappear too. And that sets Theo off. He starts yelling at her about how fake she is and about how she's just there trying to get clout. So Love has to get in the middle of the two. She pushes Theo away, but then she goes and checks on Sherry, saying, are you okay? Trying to play the Madre Linda game. And it works. I mean, Sherry is appreciative that Love came to her aid. But when Love turns to Theo, Theo is pissed off that she just chose Sherry Conrad over him. But by the end of the search, Theo needs a ride home, and Love tells him, get in the car, come on. And they head back to the bakery. And Theo admits it's hard to stay mad at the one person in Madre Linda who he can actually stomach talking to. He then asks Love, how did you do it with 40? How did you deal with this? And Love starts talking about how the media a lot of times forgets that these tragedies are about real people. Not just cheating wives or drug-addicted brothers, but actual human beings. They start actually joking about the different family griefs that they've gone to, with Theo asking her, do you think this will help me get laid? And Love says, yeah, probably, but the sex you're going to get, you're not going to probably want. People don't actually care about you. Theo reads this as a moment, so he leans in and kisses Love, but Love pushes him back and says, don't do that. She then starts taking the dishes back to the sink when Theo gets a text message from Matthew because the police had found the murder weapon. By the next day, Madre Linda is convinced that Gil had killed Natalie in a fit of rage because the two were having an affair and Gil couldn't have her all to himself. Theo heads back to college, waving goodbye to Love. Love ends up getting flowers on her doorstep from Sherry with a card that says, thanks, friend. And Joe just heads back to work in the library. And while putting books back on the shelf, Marion comes over to talk to him. And she's being oddly nice to him. It's a drastic change from how she normally acts with him. Joe tries to bring up in conversation how Marion has a daughter, but she brushes it aside saying that her daughter just stays with her ex most of the time. The more the conversation goes on, though, the more that Joe starts getting convinced that Marion is flirting with him. He tries to stop himself, saying, Joe, you can't think like this. But it becomes pretty obvious that Joe Goldberg just found his new obsession. Episode 5 picks up a couple of months after the Natalie murder. Joe and Love have really settled in a suburban lifestyle, despite Joe actually wanting that. But they put on a facade. When they go to therapy, they tell the therapist that everything's great, including their sex life, which isn't. Fact is, the couple has gotten extremely boring. The one thing that Joe finds love in is taking care of the lawn. I mean, he's gone full dad. But out of all the things about his new life that really pisses him off, it's the fact that Love decided to have Sherry Conrad be her best friend. She hired Sherry to take some photos of the couple for party invitations. They're going to send it out in the hopes that they can get Henry into the prestigious preschool in the area. But as they're doing the photo shoot, Joe realizes just how much Love has changed. She used to hate this stuff. When the photo shoot is over, he has to head to work at the library. And as soon as he walks in, Marion and Dante start making fun of him because he looks ridiculous. But Marion suddenly has a wave of inspiration. She's entering this illustration contest, and something about Joe that day inspires her. So she takes him into an office and starts to sketch. And Joe and Marion's relationship is going wonderful. They're really getting along. Joe ends up finding out that she's actually from Paris, although she doesn't have an accent. He tries to pry a little bit more into her life, but she says, there's not really much to tell. The more the talk, though, the more he becomes infatuated. Gets so far as he actually has a fantasy where he kisses her, but he does stop himself, saying, no, you can't do this. He realizes that being drawn to Marion is just a symptom. The real problem is him. Now the question is, how does he fix this problem? Joe is doing his best, though, to try to fix it. He's trying to fit in. He's doing everything Love wants, including agreeing to a dinner party with Sherry and Carrie, who he can't stand because Carrie's such a dude. But the way that Joe looks at it, happy wife, happy life. And if this is what she needs to make Henry's party a success, then he's willing to do it. Love goes to get some wine and starts pouring Sherry a glass when they see out of the window that Theo has come back. And Sherry has heard through the grapevine that he's on probation from school. He showed up to a midterm drunk, and this is a history with him. Whether it be showing up to midterms drunk or DUIs, he's definitely the bad boy of Madre Linda. Sherry kind of starts crapping all over Theo, but Love says, well, he's been through a lot. Sherry actually agrees, saying, maybe he just needs some better influences. The two women walk back in the living room where Joe and Carrie were having a mindless conversation, and Sherry says, you better watch out, Joe. Carrie might drag you on his hunting trip tomorrow, make you a better man. And Carrie says, yeah, Joe, there's a spot with your name on it. Joe tells them that sounds great, but, we have Henry's party. And he looks for Love for confirmation, but Love says, no, go. Me and my mom can do it. So now Joe is stuck going to this party. Love then hears a knock at the back door, and when she goes to answer it, she's surprised because it's Theo. Theo had made up an excuse to come over and see Love. So after they're done with the BS, Love asks him, are you okay? And Theo gives a never better, but it's not all that convincing. Joe then interrupts the conversation, but he feels like he interrupted something more than just a conversation. Joe gets really suspicious, so he starts looking at bank statements and sees a bunch of charges for Uber. And when he asks Love about them, she admits that she does call Theo some Ubers from time to time when he texts her that he's drunk. She chalks it up to someone needs to look out for this kid because nobody is. But that does make Joe pretty uncomfortable. He asks Love, is there something else you're not telling me? And she tells him about the kiss. Joe gets into a fit of rage. And Love tells him, I shut it down. But Joe screams, oh, that's shutting it down? Ordering him Ubers? You make me feel like there's something wrong with me, and I've done everything you've asked when you've been lying to me this whole time. Love just looks at him and says, you're clearly not happy, so I hope this weekend helps you get your shit together. The next day, Joe heads off with a bunch of the other husbands into the woods, and this is Joe's absolute personal hell. He doesn't want to be out in nature, and he certainly doesn't want to be out in nature with Carrie's douche crew. But as they're walking up to the base camp, one of the husbands actually tells Joe that Carrie's trips, like the one that they're on, help save his marriage. Joe, though, is pretty skeptical, especially when he gets to base camp and Carrie pops out of a tent talking about how the only thing they're going to eat is stuff that they kill, grabbing the food out of Joe's hand and throwing it away, even though Joe hasn't had any food all day. Carrie then asks for help grabbing firewood, and most of the husbands go along. Everybody except Andrew's husband, Jackson. And Joe turns to him and says, do you actually like this stuff? And Jackson sits down and explains that Henry hasn't reached the terrible twos or the crappy fort, whatever you want to call them. But sometimes it's good just to get out there in the middle of nowhere and scream. Carrie says this trip's about being a man, but I think it's about being a kid again. He then hands Joe a granola bar and says, don't tell him. That night, Carrie and the crew end up making a fire, and Carrie goes through the rules. The only thing they're going to eat, they have to kill. If you have a problem with a fellow hunter, you have to settle it by fighting. There's also no shirts. There's no cell phones as well. And the most important rule, there really aren't any rules, other than those that were just laid out, of course. They all rip off their shirts and start screaming these primal screams. Joe, the whole time, is extremely uncomfortable. This isn't him. He thinks to himself, if this is my pack, then I'm meant to be alone. Carrie comes over to Joe and tells him that you've been disconnected for so long that your manhood is literally shrinking. Love told Sherry about your dick issues. And Joe can't believe that Love actually talked about that. Carrie starts trying to hype Joe up. And Joe doesn't really want to go along with it, but what other choice does he have? Carrie and Joe then head off running through the woods to grab some food. Joe is having a hard time keeping up with Carrie since he looked like he was plucked from a Men's Health magazine. Carrie is pissing off Joe so much that he actually thinks about stabbing him, but he has to remind him that he is not who Carrie wants him to be, this primal animal. Speaking of animals, Carrie hears something in the woods, so he strips down into his boxers and heads in there. He comes out with a squirrel, and he wants Joe to kill the squirrel, but Joe isn't going to do that. He refuses. Carrie ends up killing it, but then he says to Joe, you know the rules. If you have a problem with a fellow hunter, you have to settle it by fighting. And Joe doesn't want to join Carrie's fight club, but Carrie starts pushing Joe, begging him to hit him. And finally, Joe snaps. He ends up pushing Carrie off a cliff. Although, in fairness to Joe, he didn't know that it was actually a cliff. He thought he was just pushing him into bushes. But when Joe looks down, Carrie isn't moving. So Joe ends up dragging him back to camp, and everyone's really concerned. And Joe gets down and is about to give Carrie CPR when Carrie says to him, what are you doing, Goldberg? Are you saving me? Everybody at that point is just thrilled that Carrie's alive, and he says, of course I'm alive. I've been taking glutathione for a decade. I'm unkillable. Carrie then turns to the group and says, this guy over here is an animal. He then gets real close to Joe and tells him, you are one fine specimen of a man, Joe. And I guess the emotion gets to Joe because he just starts weeping, and the crowd starts cheering him on, telling him, you got this. And the reason why Joe got emotional was because this group saw the darkness that was inside of him, and they accepted him anyway. At that moment, he finally feels like what it means to have an actual friend. And for the first time in a while, he feels like himself again. So this little trip he's on is actually doing him some good. But while Joe was off rediscovering himself, Love was taking care of the bakery when Theo walks in. He's flirting pretty heavy, asking for free food, but he lets Love know that he's taking some time off from college to process the whole Natalie thing. Love tells him, you could have told me you were struggling, but he says, I couldn't because you drew a line. No more emails, only Ubers, remember? And Love says, yeah, well, thank you. But I am worried about you. Theo says, are you? Because I'm actually worried about you. I heard your husband yelling at you the other night. So if you need someone to talk to, but Love shuts him down right away saying, I have friends to talk to. Thank you. Theo starts criticizing her for her, quote, friends, and Love tells him, it's not a crime to fit in, and maybe you'll understand that when you're older. Joe Goldberg isn't the only person to notice that Love has changed. Theo has as well. After work, Love goes home and starts baking for the party the next day when she gets a phone call, and it's from Theo. He's been arrested, and he needs to be bailed out of jail. So Love goes and picks him up. She starts yelling at him, but he lets her know that it was for the stupidest reason in the world. It was a DUI, but it was a DUI with an electric scooter. Theo then asks her, have you ever been on one? And Love hasn't. So they end up renting one, and they start zipping through the park, and Love's having a blast, but they end up falling over into a ditch. Theo then looks at Love and says, the rumors about me leaving school because of Natalie, they're not true. I'm flunking out because I can't stop thinking about you. If you want me to shut up, I will. I'm just trying to figure out how I can focus when all I want is you. Love then does tell Theo to shut up, but he doesn't. He tells Love, this is like you're playing house, but none of this actually makes you happy. Love says to him, I'm playing house. You're a teenager chasing after a married woman. I mean, what's your end game here? But then that married woman ends up kissing that teenager, and the two end up having sex. Like, for real. Show's getting good. When Love gets home, Dottie starts giving her crap for how long she was out because Dottie saw Theo get out of her car. Dottie asks her, what are you doing? And Love just tells her, I'm just helping him out. He's got nobody else. Dottie then informs Love that she missed Henry's first steps, Dottie had FaceTime Love, but Love didn't pick up because she was too busy having ditch sex. Immediately, Love starts beating herself up over this, and Dottie tries to make her feel better. And somehow, Love starts blaming Joe for her problems, but Dottie says, you can blame Joe all you want, but you liked Joe when he was a problem because you like to fix problems. You want to be the hero. You want to save somebody. It's the dynamic you had with your brother. So let me be blunt. Grow up. That boy is going to distract you from your son. Deep down, Love knows that Dottie's right. So when Theo texts her hi, she says, never again. Find somebody your own age. The next day is Henry's party. It's all set up when Joe comes back and gives Love a giant hug. Joe apologizes to Love for how he acted. Love apologizes to Joe for keeping things from him. And that night, after all the party guests leave, Joe Goldberg is a beast in the sack. He gives it to her way better than a 19-year-old college boy ever could. But as they're having pillow talk, the alarm at the bakery goes off. Joe reassures her it's probably a glitch, but I'll go check on it. And he leaves the house. And this whole thing was actually set up by Joe. He set it up as an excuse to leave the house. He knows that there's an animal inside him. He knows he can't cage it. He just has to contain it. So he parks his car outside of the library and waits for Marion to come out, tailing her. He swears he's not going to do the social media dig. He's not going to have boxes. He's just going to follow her. That's it. Because Joe tells himself that he's felt more alive these past few days watching Marion than he's felt in a long time. He knows that juggling Marion and Love is a little bit confusing, but he's up for the challenge. He promises that Love won't find out because he knows that she can't. He's just going to be careful. So Love is on her way to losing her husband. And when she looks outside, she's kind of already lost her teen heartthrob there because he's outside in his backyard getting mouth fun from some girl his own age. In episode 6, Joe is being careful with his following of Marion. That doesn't stop him, though, from breaking into her apartment. He starts going through his normal routine, though, but he has to stop himself and remind himself that this time it's different, so put all the stuff back. But Marion ends up coming home earlier than expected, which forces Joe to hide under the bed. He starts wondering why exactly she stepped out of her routine as she starts getting undressed. But then he ends up getting a text message from Love asking him where he is, and he thinks, oh, this is ironic and what I deserve. He lies to Love and says, I'm staying late at work, I'll be home soon. But he starts realizing how lucky he is to have Love. Love is at home, taking care of his son, being a great wife, while Joe is hiding under a bed trying to prove that Marion isn't worth it. As Joe is kind of having a come-to-Jesus moment, Marion is stepping out, although Joe doesn't know who she's meeting with. He thinks it could possibly be a date. But while Joe is getting text messages from Love, Love is getting text messages from Theo, although she's not responding to any of them. And that might be because she's late, so she had to pick up a pregnancy test. The stress of the situation causes Love to text 40, which is a pretty regular occurrence. She knows nobody's going to answer, but it's therapeutic. And as she's texting him about the fact that she might be pregnant with Theo's child, she starts hearing something from the outside, and it's Theo holding up a boombox, just like the scene from Say Anything, although Love is way too young for that. Theo, though, was kind of desperate because Love wasn't responding to him, so he had to get her attention somehow. And while he's still infatuated with her, he actually needs some advice because Matthew has come back. He was supposed to be out of town for a month, but he came back early, and he's clearly distracted and not doing well. He didn't really even notice that Theo had taken a leave of absence from school. Love tries to explain to him, Matthew is grieving, so you need to be there for him. So go take care of him and try to see where he's coming from. Right before Theo leaves, he asks Love, when you have sex with your husband, do you see my face? Because your face is the only face that I see. And that's when Love kicks him out. And when Love gets back inside, she's trying to figure out why she had the affair if she's, quote, so happy in her life. 5 feet away, you've got Joe, who's counting the seconds until Love goes to bed so that he can follow Marion. The two, however, do end up having sex that night, but just like Theo said, she's thinking about him, and Joe is certainly not thinking about Love. He's thinking about Marion. This will be the last time that Love gets laid in a couple days because the next day, she has to head out to a women's summit at the new vineyard that Dottie bought. And boy, does she not want to go to it. As soon as she shows up, she sees that Dottie is doing an Instagram live with Sherry. And she thinks, yeah, of course Dottie befriended Sherry. That makes sense. This whole summit's supposed to be like a woman empowerment thing, but it's more of like a vomit-inducing thing. When Dottie ends up seeing Love, she offers her some wine, but Love says no. And Dottie does ask, "Are you pregnant?" But Love tries to lie and say she's on a mini detox, and Dottie sniffs that out. She's convinced that Love is pregnant. And that begs the question from Dottie, is it Joe's or is it Theo's? Love, though, can't even respond or deny it because Dottie ends up getting distracted by somebody more popular. Later on in the summit, Sherry and Dottie do convince Love to be a part of an Instagram TV interview for the summit, but, to promote their brands, whatever influencers do. Love begrudgingly agrees, but during the interview, Dottie lets it slip that Love is pregnant, and Love freaks out, grabbing the phone, shutting it down, and telling Sherry that she needs to get the fuck out of there. She yells at Dottie, "How could you do that? I haven't even told Joe." And Dottie says, "Well, that's not surprising. Problems in your marriage seem to keep stacking up." Love starts yelling at her mom that her business is not for her to share on social media, and Dottie says, "Don't speak to me like that." And Love says, "Well, somebody has to. I mean, you're the reason why me and 40 ended up like this." And Dottie starts screaming at her about how ungrateful she is. She screams, "Your decision to have an affair with the neighbor boy has nothing to do with me. If you want the source of your unhappiness, look in the mirror." It's not all bad for Love, though. She ends up getting her period, so she's not pregnant. She ends up grabbing a bottle of wine and just heading to her room. So Love is at this miserable summit. Joe is at the library, still trying to compile more information on the riddle wrapped in an enigma known as Marion. He noticed she left her shift early, which never happens. He ends up convincing Dante to let him in her office. He starts poking around and he finds a Madre Linda recovery meeting schedule, which is bizarre. He then finds a flash drive that's buried pretty deep in a drawer. And when he pops it in, it's court records. Marion was taken to court by her ex for child neglect, misdemeanor, verbal and emotional abuse, reckless endangerment. And this is stuff that Joe had never expected. He starts telling himself that he has a loving wife and a son, and he doesn't want to get involved in such a hectic life. So the itch has been scratched, but we know it hasn't. Right before the library closes, Marion has come back, and she yells at Joe because she has to lock up, but Joe is taking his time in the basement. And all of a sudden, Marion says, "Actually, Joe, stay down there." And Joe can hear a male voice getting pretty heated. Whoever it is yelling at Marion, "I can't believe you got a lawyer." And then there's a big crash. Joe runs up to see what's going on, and there's Marion's ex-husband, who turns out is a local news star. Joe tells the guy that he needs to leave, and Marion is clearly upset. And as soon as her ex does leave, she starts yelling at Joe that was none of his business. She didn't need him being the white knight, and he should have did what she told him to do and stay in the basement and let her deal with it. But as Marion is screaming at Joe, it finally dawns on Joe. He's attracted to Marion because he has mommy issues. It's a breakthrough moment for Joe. Right before he leaves, though, he does tell Marion, "I'm not sorry. I don't let bullies just bully. I would have done that for anybody." Later that night, as Joe is in bed reading, gets a phone call from Marion, and she tells him it's an emergency, and that's because the sprinkler system malfunctioned and most of the books in the library are ruined. And when Joe shows up, Marion is really, really upset because she figures this might cost her job. Joe tries to make her feel better by telling her she's not going to lose her job, and she did call the best book doctor in the world, so they'll be able to salvage a lot of this. As they both start cleaning up the mess, Marion apologizes for how she acted earlier. The more they clean up, though, the more that those urges are coming back to Joe, and he has to keep the tiger in the cage. He does ask her what her daughter is like, and she says she's amazing. The more she talks about her daughter, the more that Joe wonders, how the hell could you have ever hurt her? They start talking about parenthood and how Joe is worried that this cookie-cutter suburban lifestyle isn't what's best for Henry. And that's when Marion says, "I get it. I mean, raising kids is a whole different game when you come through the system." And Joe had no idea that Marion had also gone through the system. That's probably why all of a sudden she turned on a dime when he said that he was adopted. He starts talking about his childhood to her, and it's stuff that he's never even divulged to Love. Joe then asks exactly what happened with the baby and her ex. And she tells Joe that they were both addicts when her daughter Juliet was born. She ended up getting into a car accident while under the influence. Juliet was in the car. She had been on the other side. She probably would have died. And Ryan, her ex, just got clean before she did. It also helps that he's a local TV personality. The community trusts him. They don't care that he kind of sabotages her in the court system and has a lot more money to throw at lawyers and whatnot. Joe apologizes and says that Ryan manipulating the justice system needs to be stopped. And Joe would love nothing more than to be that guy. But Marion tells him, "I'm working on it. I met with a lawyer yesterday." As they're having this conversation, the sprinkler system goes back on, and it's dousing them. And that's when they look at each other, and they start making out. It only stops when the sprinkler system goes off. They end up not even talking about it, just going home. The next day, Joe decided to nip this thing in the bud. He's written up his resignation letter, and he heads to the library to hand it to Marion, but Marion is trying to act like nothing happened. Eventually, though, she just comes right out and says, I do have feelings for you, Joe, but I'm not trying to split up your family. So let's just continue to work together and just let it dissolve into nothing. But Joe tells her it's not nothing. I have feelings for you, too. They start once again kissing, but Marion pulls back and says, no, you got to go. You got to go before this gets further. And Joe tells her, I actually came here to resign. Marion tells him you don't have to do that, but we should probably talk when we're more clear-headed about the whole situation. Joe feels pretty clear-headed, though. He just has to figure out what he's going to do with Love. And Love has made it home, but she has pretty big news. She got pretty hammered the night where she had the fight with Dottie. Hammered to the point where, while she was texting 40, he actually texted her back. All of a sudden, she started having hallucinations where 40 was back from the dead talking to her. It was enough to actually make her delete 40's number when she got up in the morning, because she wasn't texting 40. In reality, when she woke up the next day, she gets a knock on her door, and it's Theo, because she drunk dialed him at 4 in the morning. Theo, though, came to see how she was doing, but he also came for another reason. He ended up doing what she said, trying just to see how Matthew was doing and take care of him, when he walked into his office and saw all this information on people from the neighborhood, because Matthew had hired a private investigator at the behest of, I'm assuming, his business partner. Business partner was really concerned with the fact that if the neighborhood found out that Matthew was having people watch them, lawsuits and overall bad PR for his company were going to follow. But Matthew is convinced the story that is being told about Gil isn't true, so he wants to do his own research. He didn't tell Theo about this, though. So when Theo sees all of it, he's a little concerned. And he tells Love, yeah, Matthew's gone off the deep end. I mean, he's got all this information about everybody, including you and Joe. And now, Love is pretty stressed out about it. So as soon as Joe walks in the door, Love lets him know Matthew is got somebody watching all of us. He doesn't think Natalie's case is closed, and I don't know what he has, but I might be able to find out, because we know that Theo has a crush on me, so what if I just make him think that he has a shot in order to get information from him? And Joe is all for this, because if she's doing this, she'll be too distracted to see what Joe is doing with Marion. In episode 7, Joe continues to play a good suburban husband, even going to game nights and dinner parties with the Conrads, but the whole time he's thinking about one person, and it's not his wife, it's Marion. He's been texting her. She hasn't been responding, though. Love also has her other person on mind. She goes upstairs to put some laundry away when she looks outside and sees Theo is just chilling with a beer. So she decides to put her act in plan. She starts undressing and then fakes like she notices him and texts him, oh, sorry, didn't see you there. And he responds with, don't need to apologize. She tells him, though, I need to talk to you about something, so meet me at the bakery tomorrow. When he agrees, she puts the phone down, and there's Joe just in the doorway. And Love tells him he agreed, he'll meet me tomorrow. But Joe knows what she's doing, and he knows that he has to act a tiny bit jealous just to keep putting it on, like Love is still number one on his depth chart. He then tells her that there's a library fundraiser coming up, and Marion asks him to stay late. He plays it off like he wants to say no, but it's just going to piss her off, so he gave in. Love asks if the fundraiser is something she should attend, but that is the last thing Joe wants. Both women in the same room together? Nah, no thanks. The next day, he heads into work on a Monday, and all he's thinking about is Marion, who is getting ready for that fundraiser. The theme is Alice in Wonderland. Marion starts complaining about Sherry Conrad because this fundraiser is her doing, but out of nowhere, Joe just says, I couldn't stop thinking about you. And Marion pulls him to a more private area of the library and says, yeah, Joe, I was thinking about you too all weekend, but we can't do this. You're married. And Joe tells her it's not that simple. I promise you that. He knows, though, deep down that he can't push too hard, because if he does, he's going to end up losing her. But the conversation gets broken up by a little girl, and it turns out that this little girl is Juliet, Marion's daughter. Ryan was, quote, nice enough to drop her off so she could have some time with her. Marion introduces Juliet to Joe, but Juliet is very suspect of him. Dante ends up coming over because he's got Juliet's glasses with him, and they're broken. Marion knows she has to get the glasses fixed before Ryan sees it, but there's one problem. Her car's in the shop, so Joe volunteers to take them. Even though that's the last thing Juliet wants, Marion says, okay. As the trio walk to get Juliet's glasses fixed, Joe tells her, I just have to say, it's been a long time since I've been this happy. So I just want to say thank you. Marion then gets a text message from Ryan. He tells her that his news channel is making a sizable donation to the library and he has to be there to hand out the big check. She thinks this is another ploy by Ryan to control her, show that he can even get to her when she's at work. This is nothing more than a power move because he's furious she's reopening custody. She also warns Joe that after he stood up to him, he's never going to forget it. And that's one of the reasons why the relationship between Marion and Joe cannot happen. So Joe does what Joe does. He needs to get more information on Ryan. He ends up attending an NA meeting and listening to Ryan's spiel about getting clean. He then follows Ryan and looks at his routine of waking up pretty late, slamming a bunch of protein shakes, working out with his buddy, and being a pretty uninvolved father. But Joe has noticed that he's switched one addiction, drugs, to another, working out. And he probably just needs a little bit of a push to get off the wagon. He texts Carrie, "Do you know where I can get some Adderall? Love is making me clean the garage and I need help." And Carrie gives him a number of a guy. So Joe gets the drugs with plans of trying to get Ryan back into a downward spiral. But as Joe was tailing Ryan, Love was freaking out a little bit because her mother was supposed to watch Henry that day, but she hadn't shown up. And that was the day of her divorce proceedings. Love figures that her mom is probably still mad at her from the big fight at the vineyard because the proceedings were supposed to be done hours ago. But she does actually need to get to work. As she's trying to figure out what to do, Sherry stops over. She tells her that her caterer has flaked out for this event, and she thought, well, I know a caterer, Love. She begs Love to be her caterer, saying it would be great for the bakery and the business, and Love eventually agrees. But then Sherry notices that there's a glow about Love, and she figures that it's her sex life being back on track, but there's silence. Love chalks it up to Joe just being really busy at work. And Sherry tells her, I'm not judging you. There's a study out there that says that our sex parts get really bored with each other. I'm going to forward you a blog post I wrote to get your sex life back on track and make your man feel like he's in charge while spicing things up. Love, though, does need to get to work because she has that big meeting, we'll call it, with Theo. Theo thinking that it's a meeting, but of the sex kind. And Love says, no, I didn't call you here for that. Which really confuses Theo because she's kind of sending mixed signals. She apologizes for that, chalking it up to her being a mess with her parents' divorce and all. Theo is more than willing to help out because they're, quote, friends after all. And Love says, well, if you really want to help out, can you find out what your dad has on me and Joe? And that's really confusing to Theo of why she would even want that. He tells her, unless it's a legit crime, he's not going to care about anything you guys do. And of course, Theo has no idea they actually killed Natalie. Love, though, tells him that it's just kind of PTSD from growing up in the spotlight with her family situation going on. She's just very protective and wants to know what exactly kind of information he has. So Theo agrees. He'll do his best to try to get her all the information that Matthew has compiled on Love and Joe. Love then heads home to start working on Sherry's fundraiser when all of a sudden, Dottie walks through the door. She is clearly drunk, and it's for good reason because the divorce proceedings did not go her way. Not only did Love's dad take Anaverin, but he also found a loophole to take the vineyard that she just bought. And that was supposed to be her second act, so she's not exactly handling it well. She's more mad at herself, blaming herself for marrying the, quote, wrong man. Dottie tells her, you need to know what to look out for in your own marriage. But Love says, my marriage is nothing like yours. And Dottie asks her, so you're not sleeping with the neighbor? But Love gets super uncomfortable and just says, I'm not discussing this with you. Dottie starts pouring herself some more wine, and Love tells her it's enough, and Dottie gets really mad and leaves. But next door, Theo is trying to find out as much information as he can. It's hard to do, though, because Matthew doesn't leave his office. He's even called in a former colleague who had some high-tech facial recognition software. He wants to buy it off her because he's been able to hack into every single surveillance camera in Madre Linda. And he wants to follow people because it's just a ton of footage. He's not going to have the time to find that. The woman, though, doesn't really want to do it because the FBI had already kind of given her a hard time about this, but Matthew offers her too much money to pass it up. So she starts hooking up the system. Theo's hunt for information is simply going to have to wait. The next day, Joe spends most of his day breaking into Ryan's place as he's working out and trying to set up the steps to get him off of his routine. Spiking his protein stuff with Adderall, thinking that could be the gateway drug, taking the batteries out of his alarm clock so he wakes up late. But when he starts looking through some books, he sees some pretty provocative pictures of Marion. And he wants to take them so badly, but he doesn't. He just jerks off to him instead, and then he leaves with the plans of coming back the next day and seeing his plan fully go into effect. When he gets home, though, Love looks unbelievable. I mean, not only is she a dime, but she's cooking her ass off. She informs Joe that she is now going to be the caterer at the fundraiser, and the first thing Joe thinks of is, oh, great, Love and Marion in the same room. Just what I tried to avoid. Joe, however, plays it off like he's thrilled. But that's when Love gets really up on Joe because she had read Sherry's blog that she sent over and she decided to put some of the tactics into use. And I guess in that blog it says, as soon as your husband gets home, give him a blowjob. But Joe had no idea that this was even on the table, and he's got nothing left in the tank, if you know what I mean. So he has to tell Love, maybe another time, And of course, Love doesn't take that the right way, because what guy is going to pass up that kind of welcome home greeting? The next day, it's not going any better for Love. She's completely stressed out, and Theo comes over to tell her, I can't find out what my dad has on you or Joe yet, but I will. He then tells her, it's pretty tough to have a conversation with you and ignore the fact that I am completely distracted by how much I want you. Love, though, doesn't say anything. She actually starts crying, and Theo goes over to comfort her, and she says, I don't know what's wrong with me. And that's when Love and Theo get it on for round 2. And they had the place all to themselves because Joe had headed out that morning to see how things were going with Ryan, and everything was going according to plan. When Ryan came out to his car, there was a flat tire, and when he called over his buddy handed him a joint, and Ryan started smoking it. So Joe thinks in a couple hours, this guy's going to be so high, he's not going to know where he is. Now, while that's going great, Joe also knows he needs to make amends with Love for what happened the previous night. So he goes out and he buys her this kitchen item that's extremely tough to find, and he fills it with a bunch of pastries that she loves from LA. Love loves it. But then she starts crying, saying, I really thought you didn't find me attractive anymore. And that's when Joe realizes he's been completely single-minded, that he's neglected Love this whole time. He realizes that night at the fundraiser, he needs to be focused on Love, because if Love isn't happy, then he's never going to be able to have anything with Marion. As Love is getting ready, though, she gets a FaceTime from Dottie, who's planning on coming over and babysitting Henry, but Love says, no, it's okay, we got a babysitter. And Dottie takes it the wrong way, thinking that Love is trying to rip Henry away from her. But Love is justified because Dottie is totally wasted. So she just begs her mom, please don't drive, but I can't talk to you like this, and hangs up. Her and Joe then get ready and they head off to the library. As soon as they arrive, though, Joe starts thinking about how he's going to be able to keep Love and Marion away from each other. That, however, is ruined really quickly when Sherry comes over and brings both of the women together. And Love and Marion have a great conversation. It's one of those, oh, I've heard so much about you. No, I've heard so much about you. Marion, though, doesn't want to put Love onto the scent that there might be something between her and Joe. So she tells Love that she's seeing somebody, and Joe's been really great with working late and taking a lot of tasks off her plate. The conversation, though, then gets interrupted when Ryan walks in with a big check. And this completely takes Joe by surprise. He was not expecting this. But Dante comes over and fills him in on why that is. It's because Ryan spikes his protein shakes with drugs. He's constantly high. The reason why Joe couldn't throw him off his routine is because he's built up such a tolerance. Dante knows this because he took a sip of one time, and he was completely tweaked for the rest of the day. Ryan, though, then walks over and interrupts Dante and Joe's conversation. And really, he came over just to talk to Joe. He starts asking Joe some questions, but Joe is giving him very quick one-word answers. And finally, Ryan cuts the chase and says, it's interesting. I've seen you at meetings, hiding in the back, and you don't look like much of an addict. Ryan then gives Joe a really weird test where he tries to feed him some food, and Joe slaps the food away from him. Ryan tells him, I don't know what you're up to, but I bet my life that it's about Marion. Stay away from her. The party then kicks off, and Joe tries to have a good time, but upstairs, Sherry and Love are trying to organize this thing. There's one thing, though, that's been really bothering Sherry, so she comes out and asks, I can't take it anymore. Do you and Joe want to play with me and Carrie? Love, however, doesn't know what she's talking about, and Sherry asks, did you read the blog I sent you? And Love starts saying, yeah, Sherry, I don't really know if that was completely me. I don't know if I'm like a hot wife, which, Love, you are. But it becomes clear to Sherry that Love didn't read the whole blog, because the whole blog is about being in an open relationship, which is what Sherry and Carrie are in. And they want to invite Joe and Love into their house to take their relationship to the next level. Love can't even process this because she gets a Venmo request from her babysitter, and it's way too early for that. And that's because Dottie came over and grabbed Henry early. So now Love is very concerned, calling Dottie nonstop, trying to get Henry back. And Dottie is in a really bad state. She's grabbing tacos with Henry, but she doesn't have him in a car seat, telling the girl behind the counter that this baby is actually her dead son reincarnated. Dottie finishes her night off by setting that vineyard ablaze and then getting arrested. Luckily for Dottie, though, she has really good lawyers who convince the judge not to press charges and just to send her to rehab. But this whole stealing the grandson thing doesn't sit well with Love or Joe. Joe screams at her, what the hell are you doing? But Love interjects and says, take Henry to bed, I'll deal with this. She tells Dottie, tomorrow Joe is going to drive you to rehab, and then you are never going to see me or Henry again. Dottie begs for forgiveness, but it's too late. She could have killed Henry. The next day, Joe does just that. But right before they head off to rehab, Dottie tells Joe a story about Love's first marriage. When Love's first husband went into remission, he asked for a divorce. Next thing you know, he was dead. She has no proof, but she has a mother's intuition that Love might have had something to do with it. She's telling him this because she knows that Love has no loyalty for anybody but herself, and if anything ever happened to Joe, she would feel guilty. So now Joe has that to think about. He drops Dottie off at rehab and then heads into work. And Marion is having a really bad day because Juliet told Ryan that the two had spent the day together. And now she figures that Ryan will use it against her in the courts. She knows that Ryan's going to make this look as bad as he can. And Joe says, we can fix this, but Marion says, you're married. And as far as I can tell, your relationship isn't strained at all. She then breaks things off with Joe. After basically getting dumped by Marion, Joe heads to a fresh tart. And as they're cleaning up and closing for the day, Love comes over and shows Joe Sherry's article about opening up the relationship. Love does that thing where you pretend you're joking, but you're not really. You're just trying to read the room. And Joe actually thinks it's a great idea because this would give him the freedom to have a relationship with Marion. He can't believe this loophole just fell into his lap. They don't agree to opening up their relationship, but it's pretty obvious they're on the steps to that. They step out of a fresh tart, and they are completely unaware that they are being watched by Matthew, who typed in Love Quinn and is watching her every move. In episode 8, Joe starts looking into the swinging lifestyle, or the open relationship lifestyle. He still can't believe that this thing actually fell into his lap. But upon reading about it, if your relationship isn't on rock-solid footing, this whole swinging lifestyle is never going to work. He doesn't care, though. After the conversation he had with Dottie, he knows that Love is pretty volatile, and he doesn't want to end up dead. He ends up trying to poke around about Love's first marriage, asking if her and James had ever done anything like that, but she says, no, we weren't too far into our first marriage when he got sick. We were planning on having a baby, but then he got cold feet. Through this conversation, Joe is convinced that Love actually did murder this guy. Both Joe and Love realize, though, this isn't really them, and Joe wants to do more research into it. And by research, I mean asking Dante if him and his partner have ever swung. And it turns out, yeah, they had a threesome once, and it wasn't Dante's idea, it was his husband's. Dante tells Joe, I was willing to do anything for this man because I loved him. They get interrupted, though, when Marion comes over because she got an exciting phone call from a very famous editor from a children's magazine congratulating her on being a finalist in that illustration contest. The thing is, Marion didn't enter it. She missed the deadline. So she asks for a moment alone with Joe, and she yells at him because this wasn't his thing to do. Joe, however, knowing she missed the deadline and knowing she wanted to enter, took it upon himself to enter it because he figures the world needs to see her art. She's mad that he kind of overstepped boundaries, but she's also extremely excited, so she can't stay mad too long. When Joe gets home that night, he heads up to bed with Love, and Love starts trying to, but Joe just doesn't really seem interested. They start having a conversation about how boring their sex life has gotten. And that leads into saying, maybe we should meet with the Conrads just to get some questions answered and do our research. And this is exactly what Joe wants. He don't want to push Love into this. He wants it to be her idea. So they call Sherry and Carrie up, and Sherry and Carrie head on over to the bakery the next day with an NDA. They tell Love and Joe that this is standard procedure. While they can't confirm or deny, they've slept with a lot of couples in Madre Linda. Everybody's tried the lifestyle at least once. The conversation goes from a quick Q&A with actually the Conrads asking more Qs than answering As to planning this thing out and who hooks up with who. And everything's going fine. Everybody's willing to hook up with everybody. Joe is even willing to hook up with Carrie. But when Joe gets asked if he's willing to hook up with Sherry, he instinctively says no because Love has a propensity of killing women that he hooks up with. But Love says she's fine with it at the same time, and that freaks out the Conrads a bit. They get up, pull the NDA, and say, call us when you're on the same page. The next day at work, Joe is filling up the shelves when he sees Marion practicing with Dante about what she's going to say to the judge. And she's nervous, and Dante's being really hard on her. He's doing that because he's well-educated with a Harvard degree. And him and his husband are having problems adopting, so he knows what she's up against. She needs to be perfect. But Marion's stressed out because she just has the feeling that Ryan is planning something. She just doesn't know what it is. When the practice is over, Marion pulls Joe aside and asks him if he'd be willing to come as a character witness in her behalf. And of course, Joe is more than willing to do that. She gives him a hug and they almost get close to kissing, but they don't. Joe at least now has hope. Joe heads home and he gets a weird text message from Love that just says, quit it. And he says, quit what? She says, staring at me while I read. And this is actually in the book that Joe read about open relationships. Start off with things like fantasies. So Love is trying to do that. He stares outside to see Love reading sensually, I'll call it. I didn't know that was a thing, honestly, until this show, but hey, here I am. Joe, however, can't really do anything about it because all of a sudden a football flies into the yard and it's Theo using any excuse whatsoever to come see Love. Normally in a situation like this, Love would right out the gate let him know that Joe is home, but she doesn't do that. knowing that Joe is watching her, she hits on Theo pretty hard. Eventually, Theo does notice that they are being watched, so he heads back home. But Love walks in and says, "How'd you feel about that?" And the truth is, Joe felt nothing about it. He's no longer interested in Love, but he says possessive. They start hooking up right then and there, and then Joe ends up giving Love some mouth fun. When she's done orgasming, Joe comes up for air and she says, "Joe, do you think our relationship is solid?" "I think it's rock solid." And out of nowhere, she says, "Why don't you call the sitter and I'll text Sherry?" So the next night, the Conrads are coming over. And boy, do they come over. I mean, like, they bring a trunk of toys. The wine starts flowing, and then it kind of kicks off. Love and Sherry hooking up, but Joe can tell that Love is kind of scared about this whole situation. Carrie, however, tells Joe, "Joe, why don't we head up to the bedroom and I can show you what I set up?" Because Carrie's bisexual, and this is Joe's hell. But the whole time, he's just thinking about one person, Marion. When Carrie and Joe head upstairs, there are toys laid out, and Joe is terrified that Carrie's going to use any of these on him. And then Carrie pulls out a kit of pills and serums and just anything to keep it hard for a long time. Carrie then strips down in front of Joe, gives him a hug, but that's it, because he turns around and starts jerking it to himself in the mirror, saying that if you're not attracted to yourself, how is anyone else supposed to be attracted to you? He tells Joe to pull up a mirror, but Joe gets a phone call from Marion, and it is a welcome distraction. Even though he's not supposed to have any cell phones, he does, and he ends up taking it at the behest of Carrie, who is really close to, well, he really finds himself attractive, let's put it that way. When Joe answers the phone call, Marion is hysterical because an anonymous person emailed all of her contacts some scandalous photos, and she knows that it was Ryan, and Joe knows exactly what photos she's referring to. One of the people that the photos were sent to was that editor for that children's magazine. Marion called to kind of get a pep talk. She doesn't have many friends, and Joe is the right person to give her that pep talk. She then asks Joe, "Do you want to come over? Because I really could use a friend." But Joe's kind of in the middle of something, and while he wants to so badly, he can't leave. He gets off the phone, and Carrie takes his phone, putting it with the others, and then heading to the bedroom where Love and Sherry are having a ball, and the alcohol has clearly hit Love. The couples then split up, Love going with Carrie, and Joe going with Sherry. But Carrie and Love don't hook up. Carrie turns Love around and says, "You watch them." And as Sherry is kissing all up on Joe, she tells him, "Look at Love." But while Joe is looking at Love, he's thinking about Marion. This includes when Sherry gets on top of him and puts something inside her. He's still thinking about Marion the entire time. Love goes from kind of being turned on to all of a sudden being very uncomfortable to the point where she screams the safe word, "Hakuna Matata." Love runs downstairs, and Joe puts on some clothes and chases after her. And he's thinking, how am I the bad guy in this situation? But it's because Love knows him so well that she knows he was thinking about somebody else. Joe, of course, denies that there's anybody else, but Love tells him, "I know you. I guess I'm just never going to be good enough." The couple start fighting about their sex life and how Love felt like she had to do something. And it gets pretty contentious, with Love screaming, "Well, I had to do something because I didn't want you getting bored and finding another Natalie." Joe tries to calm her down because she's screaming, but Love says, "What, you don't want to hear the truth? Our marriage is completely one-sided. You made me kill her. In addition to being Mother of the Year, I killed Natalie for you." And Joe grabs her to shut her up. After a second or two, Love realizes what she said. And now Love and Joe are wondering, did Carrie and Sherry hear it? There's only one way to find out. They head upstairs. And at first, they seem pretty normal, but then they start giving off signs that they did hear it. Sherry gives a signal to Carrie to run, and he pushes Joe aside and tries to run downstairs to grab a phone, but Joe heads after him. Love stays with Sherry and tries to disarm her, and Joe is left to battle with the Madre Linda version of a Grecian god. But Joe uses what he has at his disposal, things like knives and shards of glass. And when Carrie heads outside, Joe grabs the hunting bow that Carrie gifted him. As Joe is trying to track down Carrie like he's the protagonist in a most dangerous game, he's thinking the whole time how this ends. If he gets killed, Love goes to prison, Henry grows up in the system, just like he did. Luckily, that won't be happening, though, because somehow Joe Goldberg hits Carrie with an arrow. He runs up to him, knocks him out by hitting him with a rock, and drags his body back inside. He meets back up with Love, who has also been able to knock out Sherry. Now they have to take both bodies over to the bakery and put them in the cage. After they lock them in, Love jumps all over Joe, and they have arguably the best sex they've ever had. It's at this moment that Joe realizes that their love language is violence. So it was a pretty exciting night in Joe's house. It wasn't all dull next door. Theo needed to come up with some kind of plan to get the information that Matthew had on Joe and Love. So he shut the breaker off. It forced Matthew to actually come outside for the first time in weeks, months. Forces Matthew and Theo to have a conversation about how each other are doing. And Theo tells him, the human body wasn't meant to just sit in an office, never getting sunlight. You need to, get out. So Matthew suggests the two get tacos together, but Theo makes an excuse that he needs to email some of his old professors because he's thinking about going back to school. It excites Matthew so much that he says, you know what, I'll pick you something up. And that frees up Theo to head into Matthew's office. But when he pulls up Love and Joe's file, there's a video. And the video shows Joe punching the wall. It's when Joe had just found out about the budding relationship between Love and Theo. Theo is completely disgusted. He feels like he now has proof that Love is in an abusive relationship. He's caught, though, by Matthew, who either made the quickest taco trip in the world or never left at all. Theo asks, "What is this?" And Matthew fills him in that he's tapped into Madre Linda's security system. Matthew tells Theo, "I wouldn't be looking at Love if she wasn't connected to Natalie or you. What exactly is it you think you're doing with Love Quinn?" They start getting into an argument about Theo's relationship with Love and Matthew's hunch that Love might have had something to do with Natalie's murder. This argument gets really heated with Theo yelling, "You need to move on. She's dead. She is dead. Get over it." You don't quite say that to someone who's still grieving, so Matthew ends up kicking Theo out of the house. This argument with Theo ends up sparking something in Matthew to get lit up that night. He is plastered. And at 5 in the morning, he ends up stumbling outside to find Joe cleaning up blood from his car, although Joe plays it off like it was spilled fruit sauce. Matthew starts questioning about what was going on the previous night because he's pretty sure he heard somebody scream, but Joe plays it off like it was nothing more than just drunken shenanigans. While Matthew is clearly suspicious, luckily for Joe, he's also clearly drunk. The next day, Joe has to get to the custody hearing, and both Joe and Dante think that Marion crushed it, but that's when they see something pretty alarming. It's the fact that Ryan is friendly with the judge. At this moment, Joe truly sees how corrupt the judicial system can be. Joe now knows that as long as Ryan's in the picture, Marion's always going to lose. After leaving the courts, he heads to the bakery, and he arrives just in time to see Sherry and Carrie wake up and are banging for somebody to help them. But this bonding experience, we'll call it, has really put a wrench in Joe's plans because Love is into him more than ever now. And that's when Joe looks down the baby monitor and thinks to himself, how in the world are these two going to get out of there alive? With the Conrads patching themselves up, Joe heads home to clean up the mess of the fight. It's at this point that he vows to get Henry out of the situation, telling him, "Don't worry, after today, we're never doing this again." He starts cleaning the entire place up. Some of the stuff he actually keeps, like all of Carrie's drugs. Most of it, however, he tosses. But as he's cleaning up, he finds a handgun. And that's when he realized, oh my god, last night could have gone way worse. Just as he's finishing up cleaning up the house, he gets a phone call from Dante. Neither Dante or Joe have heard from Marion. Joe's texted her a bunch of times, but hasn't heard back. And Dante's pretty concerned. She didn't come into work that day, and there is one place that Dante figures she might be. So he gives Joe the address, and it's a liquor store. So Joe drops Henry off with Dante at the library, and then he heads off to go find Marion. Love, meanwhile, is at the bakery, trying to figure out how to get rid of the Conrads. And Sherry is being oddly nice for being trapped in a cage. She actually reminds Love that she has to write an introduction letter for Henry's preschool. It's due that day. She actually offers to help with it, but Love says no. And then she gets a phone call from Theo saying, we need to talk. So she leaves the Conrads and heads out to the alley where Theo's waiting for her. Theo fills her in on exactly what Matthew has, i.e. the video of Joe. But all Love is concerned with is the fact that Matthew is recording people. Theo tells her it's because he's trying to figure out who killed Natalie. And Love frantically asks, well, does he think it was me? And Theo at first says no, but then he says, I don't know. Theo then tells Love that he did get kicked out of the house, but he wants her to come with him. He doesn't like the fact that she's in this, quote, abusive relationship. And that's when he drops the L word. He tells Love that he loves her. He says to Love, look me in the eye and tell me your husband isn't a violent man, which, of course, Love can't do. So Theo says, okay, I'm going to go back to my dad's, grab the footage, and that'll prove that Joe was abusing you. Love, however, says, Theo, I need to think about it, and he vows to come back. Love starts trying to get a hold of Joe, but Joe is busy with Marion. Marion is sitting outside on the stoop with a bottle, really upset. Ryan is planning on moving to New Jersey. He's got a whole new job lined up, and he's taking Juliet with him. This causes Marion to sit there beating herself up over her past transgressions. So Joe, to make her feel better, tells her, I killed a guy once. The guy was beating on my mom, and I shot him. We all have stuff in our past, but that doesn't define who you are now. Joe then informs Marion that he's ending his marriage with Love. And that's when the two go home and Joe has sex with her. The whole time, by the way, his phone is blowing up from Love. Love then realizes that she has an issue because there's an influencer in her basement. She heads downstairs with Sherry's phone and unlocks it, posting to her subscribers and followers and whatnot that she's going off the grid for a while. Sherry continues to be nice to her, figuring that you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And Sherry's kindness actually works. Love ends up telling her that Theo told her that he loves her. Sherry, of course, thinks that that's hot. And then Love tells Sherry that Matthew's been stealing surveillance video all over town. And that's when Sherry gets the idea to out him on her blog. Let the world know what Matthew's up to. It's around this time when Joe finally checks his phone and realizes he does have an issue. And that's when his mind starts racing about what Love possibly could have done. Before he can leave, though, Marion tells him that she's heading to New Jersey to follow Juliet. Joe, of course, can't believe that he's about to lose her, but she tells him, I have to do whatever it takes to be in her life. Now Joe needs to figure out how to keep her in Madre Linda. Easiest way to do this? Get rid of Ryan. Before he can even worry about Ryan, though, he does have to get home to find out what the big deal that Love is talking about. And she informs him that they're all being spied on, everybody, but she's taking care of it. She took Sherry's advice, wrote a blog post about it, and she recently just saw a bunch of suits run into Matthew's home. She expects they're trying to clean up the mess before the feds show up. Love gives Joe a hug, and that's when she feels his back and feels the gun. And Joe tells her that he got it from Carrie. And Love is really pissed off that they brought a gun into her house. She thinks this could actually help them out, though, make it look like a murder-suicide, because, hey, that worked once before. And Joe tells her, that's a great idea, but the whole time he's thinking, this marriage cannot end soon enough. But Love is right. Next door, those suits are from Matthew's company, and they're begging him to delete all the information he has before the feds show up. He's convinced, though, that he's onto something, he just hasn't found it yet. He keeps rewinding the last moments that you see Natalie on camera, which was going into a fresh tart. His business partner actually lays out the entire Goldberg plan, but saying how ridiculous it is. And Matthew knows that this hunch is a little far-fetched, but he just feels it. Logic, however, gets to him, and he ends up deleting it all. But that's not before Theo snuck back into that room and got most of it on a flash drive. Theo goes in his car and starts looking at the flash drive, and he starts doing exactly what Matthew did. But then he looks at another camera angle, and that's what he sees what Matthew didn't. That's when he sees Joe Goldberg get into the car, which was blocked by the alley. Clear as day that person in the car wasn't Natalie. It was Goldberg, and now he's got him. He goes to find Love, but Love is dealing with the Conrads again, although this time Love's mood has completely changed. Sherry tries to put on the good face, but it's not working this time, so Sherry's emotions get the best of her, and she says, screw Joe for letting you fix a marriage that never stood a chance. And that's the final straw for Love, who thinks that their marriage is great. She walks back, puts the gun in the transfer window, and says, I'll let whoever shoots who first out. If your marriage is so perfect, then stay together and die. Theo, though, is still having trouble getting a hold of Love, so he heads to the bakery. Love isn't there, though. Unbeknownst to him, the Conrads are. He looks all over the bakery, but he can't find them because they're hidden in a secret room in the back of the basement. And he's about to leave until all of a sudden he hears a gunshot because the Conrads figured, let's put this bulletproof glass to the test. Carrie shoots the lock, doesn't work. Bullet actually ricochets and hits Sherry's ear, and they're freaking out a bit. And that's when Theo rushes in and sees that the Conrads are locked up. They tell Theo everything. This is a lot to process for Theo. He's having complete denial issues that Love had anything to do with the murder of Natalie. But the Conrads are trying to hammer home that Love was a part of it. Love shows up at the bakery a few minutes later. Right before she's about to walk in, she gets a phone call from Dante asking if he should put Henry down. And this is a bit of a surprise. Love had no idea that Henry was even with Dante. That's because Joe went off, found Ryan, and stabbed him to death. Love ends up calling Dante back up and saying, I'll try to get in touch with Joe, and if not, I'll call you back. Before she can even deal with that situation, she walks back into the bakery where she sees Theo, which is a big surprise. And Theo had headed upstairs to look for a key to let the Conrads out. Theo comes clean, saying the Conrads are downstairs saying you killed Natalie, but I know that's not true. I know it was Joe, and I have proof. He asks Love, come with me, but she says no. I need you to leave Madre Linda and never come back. We're not going to be able to see each other again. As Theo heads for the door, Love calls his name and knocks him out, right down the steps. In the season finale, we get a little more backstory into Joe's mommy issues. When Joe was sent to the home, he was able to find his file and locate where his mother was living. So he tracked her down, only to find out that she had completely restarted with a new son, a little boy named Jacob. Joe confronts her, asking, why did you just leave me? And the best answer his mom gives him is, some people just need a new start. Modern day Joe has rushed home and is frantically scrubbing all the blood off of his hands, hiding the bloody shirt, and thinking about how he's going to get Henry out of there. But simultaneously, he gets a text from Marion saying, something happened to Ryan, call me, and then Love walks through the door. Love comes upstairs and just starts rambling about plans and whatnot, but Joe can sense that something's wrong, and then he looks on her jacket cuff and notices a smear of blood, and he asks about it. And Love has to come clean that it's Theo's. She tells Joe that he's still there, and Joe says, I'll clean him up, don't give it another thought. And that's when Love completely changes the conversation and says, I think it's time we start a new chapter. I think it's time we start trying to have another baby. At this point, Joe is just trying to tell her anything she wants to hear, figuring that he'll be gone with Henry soon, so he says, yeah, I think that's a great idea. And then he heads off to deal with her mess. As Joe is cleaning up the Theo mess, he actually hears a gunshot go off. And that's because Sherry and Carrie are fighting. Sherry ended up shooting the gun, and it ended up hitting Carrie's leg. Joe, however, isn't going to interfere with that. And he really doesn't have time to because Marion calls him. She tells him that somebody killed Ryan. They suspect it was a mugging. She's only calling because she's concerned that the police might look at her, even though she has an alibi. Joe tries to make her feel better by saying, the man that hurt you is gone. Your life is now going to get easier. And Marion does admit, I'm not sad that he's gone. Joe then tells Marion, well, something else happened last night. Me and Love are officially separating. Joe then tells Marion, get out of town while all this Ryan stuff's going on. Think of somewhere you want to go and just go. And Marion asks Joe to come with them. And that's because she admits to Joe that she loves him too. And Joe excitedly says, yeah, count us in. I mean, we'd be crazy not to try after everything we've been through. We just got to tie up a few loose ends and then we'll go. Marion hints at the possibility of going to Paris, and then they hang up. Joe is pumped, he's excited, but he's got an issue because Theo actually isn't dead. He opens up the tarp, and there's Theo, pretty banged up. He sees Joe's face, and he immediately starts apologizing to him. Through conversation, Joe figures out that there was an affair going on between Theo and Love. But even after all that, Joe isn't about to kill Theo. He puts him in his car and drugs him up with Carrie's supply, and then drops him off at a hospital loading dock. He then heads to Dante's house and tries to pick up Henry, only to find out that Love has already picked up Henry. And that's when Joe knows that he has an issue. And he does. Love ended up finding the bloody shirt. And as soon as she sees it, she knows that he was having an affair. It's all she could think about when she went to a fresh tart. She had to act, though, like everything was normal. So when Kiki comes up and asks her to make some cupcakes for her, she agreed. But she has to tell somebody about this affair. So she goes downstairs and tells her best friend, Sherry Conrad. And Sherry's advice is to kill Joe because he was abusive. Sherry tells her, I'll back you up. After that, you can let me out. Carrie from the corner says, you can let us out. And Sherry hears him but ignores it. She just starts shitting all over husbands, saying how they force wives into situations. And after this whole anti-husband rant, Love just looks at her and says, you're a monster. I always knew your marriage was a sham, but looks like the only murderer in this room is you. And then she walks out so Sherry can have an awkward conversation with Carrie. Love then heads home and makes dinner, waiting for Joe to show up. And he does, but Joe has to play it cool and act like everything's okay. He sits down to eat, and he's kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, and that's when Love brings up the fact that she saw on Twitter a local TV guy was murdered. And she recognized the name, and she looked into it, and it was the ex-husband of Marion, his boss. Love asks him straight up, do you love her? And Joe doesn't say a word. Love tells him, I know you cheated on me and you lied. But Joe says, well, you cheated on me with Theo. Do you really want to play this game? That's when Joe brings up the idea of divorce, going their separate ways, amicably, raising Henry, co-parenting, doing this like civilized adults. Joe tells her, we don't have to do anything impulsive. She says, what's that supposed to mean? And Joe says, well, what happened with James when he tried to leave? Your mother told me. Love is having a tough time processing the D word, but before she can even give Joe an answer, Henry starts acting up, so she has to go tend to him. Joe's concerned that she might come back with Henry or a knife, so he arms himself with a meat cleaver. But when Love returns, she doesn't have either. She does, however, set the record straight on what happened with James. Just like now, she was taken completely off guard when James asked for a separation. She couldn't believe that he was with her when he was sick, but then he gets better and he wanted to be away from her. So she drugged him. James's death was an accidental drugging. She just didn't get the doses right. She wanted to numb him so she could sit him down to talk to him and convince him that they were meant to be together. But things went awry and James ended up dead. The good news is for Joe, she's learned from her previous mistakes. She's gotten the doses right. And that's when Joe starts feeling really funny and he realizes, oh shit, I've been drugged. As Joe lies there paralyzed on the floor, Love tells him, no one will ever love you like I love you. But before she can try to convince Joe that they're meant to be together, she has to go drop those cupcakes off to Kiki. But she grabs Joe's phone and texts Marion, "Come to my house ASAP, it's an emergency." She ties up Joe, says, "I'll be back in 10 minutes, and when I come back, I'm going to save our marriage." So Love heads off, but next door, Matthew sees her leave, and he's still pretty convinced that Love Quinn had something to do with it. But what he's really concerned with at the moment is the fact that he hasn't heard from Theo. So with him already suspicious that Love might have killed Natalie, he's now concerned that maybe Theo is in their house. So he sneaks in, and that's when he finds Joe lying there, paralyzed. Matthew starts asking Joe, "Where is Theo?" But Joe can't answer because he's so drugged up. He's trying to signal to Matthew to look at his phone, and finally Matthew picks up on this and sees the Waze history, which had directions to a hospital. Now that Matthew has that information, you'd think maybe he would save Joe, but no. He thinks that the couple had something to do with Natalie's death, so he ties Joe back up, leaving him the way he found him, and says, "Enjoy whatever Love does to you." And then he heads off to get Theo. Love ends up returning a few minutes later. She then waits for Marion to show up, and Marion shows up a few minutes later. She's very surprised when Love answers the door, but Love says, "Why don't you come inside, because I'm the one who texted you." Marion awkwardly comes in the door, but she doesn't see Joe. Joe, however, can see the entire conversation. Love confronts Marion about the affair, and Marion tells her, "He said you guys were separated." Marion starts apologizing for possibly breaking up this marriage. Love then tells Marion about how Joe was the one who killed Ryan, and Marion is complete disbelief, but Love tells her when Joe's obsessed with somebody, he'll do anything for them. I would know, he did it for me. And it looks like Love is about to kill Marion when all of a sudden Juliet shows up because she's got to go to the bathroom, and that changes the entire mood in the room. And with Juliet in the bathroom, Love tells her, "You and your daughter need to run, just completely disappear." Ryan is just the beginning of what he's willing to do. The whole time, Joe is hoping that Marion comes to his defense, but she doesn't. Marion actually tells Love that she should run, although Love says it's not that simple. But Marion warns her that if she doesn't, she could end up losing her son. She needs to think about him, not about anybody else, just Henry. Marion ends up leaving, completely intact, very much alive. And Love walks over to Joe and says, "Well, I do see why you like her. I mean, I can't believe I almost took that little girl's mother away." Love starts rambling, justifying her actions, and then saying, I realized my husband's the problem." She gets down to kill Joe, but that's when Joe stabs her with a needle, injecting her. Whatever Love gave him has worn off, and that's because Joe started to wonder what exactly Love was growing in the garden, so he looked into it and found out it was a flower that could be turned into a paralytic. He looked into some antidotes, and when Love went to go check on Henry earlier, he took one. It wasn't enough to completely stop the paralytic, but it was enough to bring him out of it quicker. And while Love gave him just the right amount, Joe found out where she was hiding the doses, chocked a syringe full of it, and injected her so much that it would stop her forever. Love's last dying words are, "We are perfect for each other, but we're bad for Henry, and he will know what you did." And then she keels over and dies. Joe now needs to start thinking about Henry, what exactly he's going to do with him. He knows that there's a pretty good chance Love will go down for this, but he was married to her, and he can't risk having Henry grow up in the system like he did. So he ends up taking Henry over to Dante's place, writing a letter explaining the whole situation, knocking on the door, and saying goodbye to his son one last time. He heads back to the house to try to set the scene, dragging Love's body into the kitchen, putting a syringe in her hand, and writing a suicide note. He even goes so far as to chop 2 of his toes off. Then he puts the oven on full blast, and the house goes up in flames. Joe disappears, but the house fire was put out in just enough time to salvage a lot of the evidence. The suicide note was found. The 2 toes were found, but the rest of Joe Goldberg wasn't, so it looks like Love chopped him up. The story of Love Quinn goes national. It's even bigger than Guinevere Beck. Shortly after, Madre Linda begins to heal. Matthew picks up Theo from the hospital, and their relationship seems good. Henry is still with Dante. The Quinns put up a fight to get baby Henry, but Love had already put it in writing that Dottie was never to see him again. So it took a little bit in the court system, but Henry ended up right where his, quote, dying father wanted him to be, in a loving home. The bakery was taken over by Andrew and Jackson. They rebranded it, but it became a pretty popular spot. And then there's Sherry and Carrie. Carrie was on death's door when Sherry realized these two don't even trust each other. There's got to be a key in here somewhere. And she started turning over every single container until finally she found one. Of course, they were able to parlay this into success, writing a blog post, making them out to be the heroes, and even writing a book, which was very successful. It even led to them doing TED Talks. But then finally, there's Joe. Joe disappeared forever, but he's still looking for Marion. And there's only one place that she hinted at going, and that was Paris. So somehow, he was able to get on a flight to Paris with No passport, a doctored passport. I don't know. Those details are pretty murky, but Joe Goldberg is in Paris, and he's looking for Marion. And that is the end of Season 3 of You. Thank you so much for getting this part of the recap. I really appreciate it. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you thought this was good. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. Be nice in the comment section. Nasty comments make me feel bad. I do have merch. Go buy a shirt or something. That'd be cool. And if you know somebody who's looking for a recap of You Season 3, please consider sharing this to your social media platforms or blogs. I'm talking to you, Sherry. And let me know if you like this season. But once again, thank you so much for supporting the channel.